The night began with humiliation wrapped in laughter, the kind that echoes long after the door closes. Mark Reynolds stood alone in his small Ohio kitchen, still wearing the jacket he had borrowed from his brother, realizing that the courage it took to show up had been mistaken for something to mock. He had come home to the quiet hum of a refrigerator and the weight of a life that asked him to be strong every single day, even when he had nothing left to give. What he didn't know, as he leaned against the counter and closed his eyes, was that this so-called joke was the first domino in a chain of events that would rewrite everything he believed about trust, healing, and second chances. If you believe stories of kindness can still change lives, take a moment right now to like, comment, share, and subscribe to the channel. Support stories that remind us second chances are real and that good things still happen to ordinary people. Mark had not planned on dating. As a single father raising his 8-year-old son, Caleb, his days were carved into strict routines that kept grief from spilling over. Mornings were for packing lunches and tying shoelaces, evenings for homework at the kitchen table and quiet cartoons before bed. Since losing his wife, Hannah, to a sudden illness 3 years earlier, Mark had learned to survive by narrowing his world to the essentials. Love in his mind had become a dangerous luxury. The neighbor across the hall, though, had different ideas. Brenda Collins was friendly in the loud, unfiltered way of someone who believed good intentions erased bad judgment. She teased Mark about being too young to give up on life and insisted she knew someone perfect for him. Mark laughed it off until one evening when exhaustion lowered his defenses and he agreed, mostly to stop the conversation. The date was set up as casual, almost careless, and that should have been the warning. The restaurant was loud, the kind where laughter bounced off walls, and Mark arrived early out of habit. He sat alone longer than he expected, checking his phone, wondering if he had misunderstood. Then he noticed the glances. A group at the bar kept looking over, smiling in a way that felt sharp. It dawned on him slowly, painfully, that he'd been set up as entertainment. Brenda's idea of motivation had crossed into cruelty, and the woman who was supposed to meet him never intended to come. The laughter wasn't meant to include him, it was meant to watch him wait. Mark left without causing a scene because that was who he had become. Quiet endurance had replaced confrontation. But something cracked on the drive home. The sense that he had been reduced to a joke pressed against old wounds, the ones that whispered he was only interesting because of tragedy. He didn't tell Caleb what happened. He tucked his son in that night with the same steady hands, but inside he felt smaller than he had in years. Life continued, because it had to. School drop-offs, overtime shifts at the manufacturing plant, frozen dinners eaten too late. Mark avoided Brenda politely and told himself the world made sense if he kept expectations low. Then, on a rainy Tuesday, everything shifted in the most unassuming way. The community center down the street hosted a weekend food drive, and Mark volunteered because it was something he could do with Caleb. It felt safe. Purpose without vulnerability. That was where he met Sarah Whitaker. She wasn't introduced as anything important. She was simply there, organizing boxes with methodical calm, her hair pulled back, sleeves rolled up. She noticed Caleb first, knelt to his level and handed him a marker to label cans. Mark observed from a distance, bracing for pity, but it never came. Sarah treated them like people, not a story. There was something grounding about that. Over the next few weekends, their paths crossed again. Sarah volunteered consistently, never drawing attention to herself. Mark learned through passing comments that she worked as a physical therapist and had moved to town after caring for her own father during a long illness. Loss, he realized, recognized loss. There was no dramatic moment, no spark that demanded interpretation. Just an ease that felt unfamiliar and therefore suspicious. Mark's instinct was to retreat, but life kept nudging him forward. Caleb grew attached to the routine, and Sarah became a constant presence, someone who listened more than she spoke. Mark found himself sharing pieces of his world without realizing it. The weight of responsibility, the fear of failing his son, the quiet anger at a future that had been stolen. Sarah didn't try to fix anything. She simply stayed present, and that was something Mark hadn't known he needed. Change came subtly, then all at once. Mark started sleeping better. He laughed more easily. The community center became a place of connection rather than obligation. And one evening, as they cleaned up after a long day, Mark realized he trusted Sarah. Not in the fragile, hopeful way of romance, but in the solid way of mutual respect. He told her about the joke date, not to seek sympathy, but because it had shaped his hesitation. Sarah listened, and in her steady attention, Mark felt something loosen inside him. Brenda eventually apologized, awkwardly and without fully understanding the damage she had caused. Mark accepted it, not for her sake, but for his own. He had learned that bitterness demanded more energy than he could afford. The joke that once defined his fear lost its power as his life filled with better moments. Caleb thrived, encouraged by adults who saw his curiosity and nurtured it. Mark began to believe that healing didn't mean forgetting, but allowing joy to coexist with grief. The turning point came on a quiet Sunday afternoon. Mark watched Caleb play in the park while Sarah sat nearby, talking about plans for the community center expansion. There was no declaration, no dramatic confession. Just the understanding that whatever this was, it was built on patience and shared values. Mark realized his life had changed, not because someone rescued him, but because he allowed himself to be seen beyond his pain. Near the end of summer, the three of them attended a small fundraiser together. Mark felt something close to peace, a word he had avoided for years. He wasn't cured. He still missed Hannah. He still carried responsibility like a second spine. But he also carried hope, and that was new. If this story has touched your heart even a little, take a moment now to like, share, and engage with the video. Your support helps keep stories like this alive for others who may need them. Just before we close, leave a comment telling us whether you believe second chances come when we least expect them. Your words might be exactly what someone else needs to read today. Mark never confronted Brenda again about the joke date, because its purpose had dissolved. What began as humiliation became the unlikely doorway to a fuller life. He learned that kindness didn't always announce itself, and healing often arrived disguised as ordinary days. In a small American town, a single dad discovered that being the subject of laughter did not define him, but the quiet courage to keep showing up did. And in that realization, his life changed forever.